Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, the Right Honourable Beverley McLachlin, was born in the small town of Pincher Creek, Alberta, in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. She was a curious child, an avid reader and a good student, and she studied philosophy and then law at the University of Alberta. She practiced law, first in Alberta, then in British Columbia, before becoming a judge at the age of 37. In 1989, she was appointed only the third female justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, before being appointed Chief Justice, the first woman, in 2000. I am thrilled now to present an interview with the Right Honourable Beverley McLachlin on Beyond Politics. Madam Chief Justice Beverley McLachlin, welcome to Beyond Politics.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, I'm just thrilled to have you here. And, you know, you have such an important and interesting position, and yet you grew up in Pincher Creek, Alberta, in a small town. And as I understand it, on a ranch. Is that right?
Yeah, we, for the most part of my youth, we lived about 25 miles southwest of Pincher Creek in the foothills, and we had cattle and all the other kinds of animals that go along with that. And my father also had a sawmill business, so it was a busy place.
Did you have chores?
Oh, yes, I did. But mostly I helped my mother around the house because she had a lot of work. She would cook for the ranch hands and that kind of thing, and she wasn't all that well, so I mostly spent, my chores were in the house.
Right. You had siblings, I understand.
Yes.
You were the eldest, though?
Yeah. Exactly.
How many siblings?
Well, I had two brothers who were born fairly close to me, then a sister who was 10.5 years younger than me.
Okay.
And then my youngest brother came along much later, so it was rather a staggered family.
Yeah,
but
a large family.
But large overall, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I wondered about the impact of the actual place itself on you, because that part of Alberta is so stunningly beautiful. I mean, the foothills and the view of the mountains and that sense of landscape and being part of that landscape is very powerful. And I wondered how it impacted you as a person.
Well, it did impact me, I think, profoundly. I always had a sense of being extremely fortunate to live in such a beautiful place. And there might be other hardships and problems or whatever, but there was always that grounding. We are so lucky to live in such a wonderful part of the world and be able to look out on the foothills, on the mountains every morning when we get up. And so it colored my whole sense of life.
Tell me a little bit also about your mom and dad. You mentioned your mom, and that she was not particularly well as you were growing up. One of the other things I'd read about your mom is that she wanted to be a writer.
That's true. She never was able to achieve the education she wanted. She loved school, and she never was able to really complete her school and go to university. First of all, her mother was ill and she had to stay home to nurse her, and then that was what women did in those days, and it was expected. And then she married and quickly had children and many other responsibilities. She was an avid reader, but I remember as a young girl hearing her talk about how, she would have loved to have been a writer. She thought she would have liked to have been a writer of children's books, but she'd never managed to achieve that. And I think that instilled in me somehow a sense of the value of actually getting a good education and getting a career and exploring and developing what you could, even as a woman, because I saw that she regretted. She regretted as she grew older that she hadn't been able to fully develop her intellectual and career wishes.
Now, because she had grown up in an environment where it was just expected that she would marry and raise a family of her own, was there ever that expectation on you from her, or did she make it clear that she had different hopes for you?
Well, she didn't say too much. I think that she was very pleased to support me in whatever I wanted to do. I think part of her sort of thought, well, I should, find a nice young man and settle down and have a family too. But she never really pushed that, no, nor did my father.
What was your father like?
He was very bright. He was curious. He was always interested in ideas and reading and discussing what was going on in the world and in politics and that kind of thing. So he brought that dimension. We were involved in the world even though we were remote from it.
Right.
We always got the newspapers, and even though it might be the Toronto Star on the weekend and the Winnipeg Free Press and the local paper, but there would be discussion about all of those things, what was happening in Canada, what was happening in the world.
And were you included actively in those discussions?
Yeah, I think it was, there wasn't a hierarchical,
right.
We all knew that our parents were ultimately in charge, but I think that they included us in those discussions, and there was no stricture on what you could say or whatever. We were all encouraged to participate.
You liked the library, as I understand it. You spent a lot of time in the library as a child. What was your interest in books?
Well, there wasn't much else to do. But I went to school and we got into reading, of course, and those were the days when we really didn't have, when I was younger, we didn't have a television. Nobody had television. Television came when I was about 10 or 11 or 12. So there was a period when I was growing up when I would read 2 books a week easily, and sometimes more. And the salvation was that the women of this little town had put together a library, a lending library, with a good children's section and a good teenage section and a good adult section. And my brother and I were both into reading, so we would go on Saturday and we'd each choose our limit of 2 books, and then we'd trade them off at the middle of the week. And I think that was terrific, because that's the age when you soak up vocabulary, and I moved through the children and moved through the teenage and got into the adult. So I was reading adult novels. Sometimes the ladies at the desk would suggest I shouldn't take that one yet, but
and would you still take them regardless?
Well, I knew that there were limits, but there wasn't anything too terrible in that library, I suspect, anyway. But it was wonderful. Great authors, they were all there, and some things I liked and some things I didn't, and so it was a wonderful way to explore the world, and also to become a good reader, someone who can read quickly and has a reasonable vocabulary.
Well, and also books are so incredible, especially as a child, because as children, naturally, our borders are much more narrow, and books allow us to realize that that our imaginations can take us anywhere, but that there really is a tremendous world all around us, and that it's there for us to explore too.
Absolutely. So that's the sense one got from all this. So it's an education also in how other people in other parts of the world lived, even though our own life was pretty circumscribed to one geographical area. A big deal was a trip to Calgary. But one did have a sense, one got a sense as one was growing up of the rest of Canada and North America and the world beyond.
Was there an expectation that you would go to university?
I think so, because I was a pretty good student, and I think my parents thought that would be the best thing to do, and there wasn't a lot of help. I mean, I think there was an expectation that also I'd have to get scholarships and things like that, because it was a big family and there wasn't a huge amount of money, No, my parents were very pleased and I think somehow expected that I would go on to university. They didn't know what I'd do, probably thought I'd be a teacher or something like that.
What did you think you were going to do?
I had no idea. I didn't really get excited about the idea of being a teacher. I knew I couldn't be a nurse. I didn't think I was suited for that.
Because you can't stand the sight of blood?
No, I think I'm more a big picture person than a detail person. I'd worry about missing a detail on the
which I suppose is significant
on
if
the
you're
drip
a nurse.
or something. But so I thought that I'd go to university and do a basic degree. But you know, there was such a limited number of things people could do. When I was in, for women anyway, at least from the role models I had around me, they gave us an aptitude test in grade 8, and the teacher came to me, and she was very distressed, I thought, and she said, well, I don't know what to make of this aptitude test, and then she looked at it, and she looked at it some more, and she said, finally, she said, your reading and comprehension scores are very, very high, she said, but there's not much you can do with that, she said, but I'll tell you this, there's 2 things you must never be, a waitress or a telephone operator. So I had ruled those out completely.
Thank goodness you had those guidelines. You did a degree in philosophy, and I wondered why. I mean, on one hand, I thought it was a very apt choice because the law involves, and you may not have even thought of a career in the law at this stage, but I think that it gives you a really good basis for the way you have to think as a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, so I assume that, having taken my very few limited philosophy courses in university, but I thought it was an interesting choice, philosophy.
Yeah. Well, I started off thinking my major would be modern languages, and I did French, which has stood me in good stead, and some German. And then in my first year, I took a philosophy course, which was then mandatory, and I really liked it. And I felt it helped me a lot. I had a very muddled mind, it seemed to me at that point, and philosophy brought a structure, taught me to analyze, taught me to think, and I was pretty good at it. And I was also interested in ideas, the kind of ideas, and arguments and discussions that went on. It wasn't just memorizing and repeating back or memorizing and developing, but we would have arguments and debates and discussions about different positions and different philosophers and their positions. So I liked it and I enjoyed it, and I thought, well, this is something, I think I'll switch my major, and I did the major in philosophy instead. At
which stage did you decide on law?
Well, it was after I had completed a 4-year degree in philosophy, and I was
determined not to be a phone operator.
But I thought at that point that the usual career path was to do a master's and a doctorate and then become a philosophy teacher at university. And the more I thought about that, the less I was convinced that should be for me. So I was back home, and that summer after my 4th year, working on the ranch, and I wrote to the dean of the law school, Wilbur Bowker. I knew who he was. I'd been around the University of Alberta, Edmonton for 4 years, and asked him for information on law school. And he wrote back by return post. I'll never forget going into the little post office and finding this letter, much to my amazement. And he said, "You're accepted. Starting date is September, whatever."
Wow.
And so I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. So I hadn't decided, but then I thought about it more and more, and I thought, well, I'll go and give it a try. And if it doesn't work out, I still have plan B. It's still not too late to go to some other university in the States or whatever and do a master's. So I did go in September, and I really, really enjoyed it and liked it, and I've been in the law ever since.
Did you practice in Alberta?
Yes, I did for 3.5 years, including my articles in Edmonton, and I really was lucky. I had a terrific set of articles with what would now be a smallish firm, but was then a good-sized firm, and great lawyers, people who, for that day and age, unusually saw no impediment in a woman practicing.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I did run into that from other lawyers and other firms and so on. But in the firm where I was, Woodmoyer, Hyde and Ross, they had one or two women who had done really well, exceptionally. In those days, it was very unusual. But they didn't see that this was a problem at all. So that I was very fortunate in that. And then after 3.5 years. My husband, Rory McLachlin, went to British Columbia to work in a business we had there, and I followed, and we ended up in Vancouver. And I then became associated with Bullhauser and Tupper in Vancouver, which is a large and fine law firm, and I worked there for a number of years on some of the bigger construction and personal injury files. And then I did a little bit of teaching at UBC Law School. Ended up saying I'd like to do this for a few years, and I became associate professor there.
Had you considered leaving it at that, simply going full time into that type of work, into academia?
Yeah, it certainly was a path I was on. I was starting to wonder after 5 or 6 years, I had to decide whether I might like to go back into practice or combine academia and practice, because I was also attracted by practice, which I enjoyed very much. But about that time, I was asked whether I would, much to my amazement really, I was asked whether I would consider becoming a judge. And I thought about it. It was a difficult decision.
Was it really? Why was it a difficult decision?
Well, I was very young, 37, and I was being offered a position on the county court, which was the lowest superior court, and a federally appointed judge.
And you had a child at the time.
And that was fine. I don't think that was a problem. I was certainly going to continue to work at something. But I recognize that becoming a judge is a little like getting married. I mean, it's a permanent commitment. It's hard to re-enter the practice of law, and the law societies actually have rules that for a certain period of time you can't practice in any court of equal or lower jurisdiction than where you were sitting. And so I recognized becoming a judge would be a real commitment, that I was very young. I was only for that commitment, 37, that I might be better to either continue teaching or go back and do more practice. But on the other hand, I had the opportunity, one never knows when it'll come, and so in the end I decided to take that opportunity, and it did. Again, I was very fortunate. It did work out. I really love being a judge, and I always have. It's 30-some years now, I guess. And
you had what has been described by some as I think meteoric is too much of a word to use in this circumstance, but you had a very quick rise up. You did well. You became then a justice of the Supreme Court of British Columbia, and then you were about to become the Supreme Court Justice or the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of British Columbia. And your husband passed away. Yeah. Had he been ill for a long time?
Yeah, he had. He had been ill for, we didn't know how ill he was, but he had really had difficulties for about 10 years, and then finally he became very ill and he passed away in September of '88, which was about the time that I was asked to, after having served on the Court of Appeal, become Chief Justice of the Trial Division.
Right. And I guess looking at that and reading about that, I was thinking how much that would have been to cope with, all that change in one time, to have to, because quite soon after that you were also appointed a Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada.
Yes.
So you were looking at grieving yourself over the death, the loss of your spouse, helping your son, who was 12, I think at the time, changing jobs, and then moving to a new city.
Yeah.
There's a lot to deal with.
Yeah, it was, but in some ways, I dealt with part of the grieving, and by immersing myself in my work. Different people deal with these things in different ways. You realize looking back that it's a long process, but at the time, my way of proceeding, for better or for worse, was simply to immerse myself in my work and just get on with things, and it did seem to work for me. And much as I love Vancouver, I think the move was perhaps a help personally, because it forced me into a new life.
Right, right. What was your reaction when you received that phone call asking you to come to Ottawa?
Well, I was the first phone call, I was quite surprised. I knew that they would be looking for a judge from British Columbia because we have a tradition in Canada of regional appointments, and Justice McIntyre, who had announced his retirement, was from British Columbia, and so, well, it wasn't absolutely certain. The expectation was it'd be somebody from British Columbia, and I was told that probably, or you read in the papers, you see your name amongst those who are being speculated about. So it wasn't a total surprise, but coming so soon after I'd just taken on a new job, which I would have liked actually to have spent a little more time developing, it was a bit of a surprise, but I felt that, again, when you're asked to take on a responsibility like the Supreme Court of Canada, which is a great honor but a great responsibility, you think about it very seriously. I mean, you're being asked to serve your country in a very special way, and it's not a light thing to say no. And so again, I considered it, and I said, yes, this is what I'll do.
What was your first day like when you arrived at the courthouse and you walked in? And
oh, gee, I don't know if I really...
blocked it.
I think maybe I blocked it. I think it was... Everything happened so rapidly because Chief Justice Dixon at the time said, you're going to be sworn in on April 17th. I think that I actually was asked in early April or late March. And so the swearing in was a very short time thereafter. So I had to get myself organized and my son and my sister and my close family organized to just get down to Ottawa. And basically my first impression was of that day before the swearing in and the swearing in, and meeting all the new justices and just the family all around, and this whirl of activity as we went through this process. And so it was very hectic. And it wasn't until, after all that quieted down and I was on my own here in Ottawa, staying at the Minto Suites until I found a permanent place to live, that I really started getting into the work, talking with the other judges and so on.
Was it a welcoming atmosphere?
Yes, I think it was. It was very welcoming, yeah. There's a lovely little story. When I was sworn in, Bertha Wilson was the first female justice on the Supreme Court, and Claire Louis-Dubé had come after her, and then when I was sworn out, I became the third. So when I had finished taking my oath, I went up, and Bertha Wilson leaned over and whispered across the bench, 3 down, 6 to go. So I thought that was quite a welcome.
You remarried in 1992, and to a wonderful man, Frank McCardle. And I was actually wondering, as I read through your your history, how one goes about asking out on a date a justice of the Supreme Court.
Well, I'm not. You should have to ask my husband that. I think
you should. I think he'd probably be pleased to
be shy. But then he's not a shy person.
I guess that's what you need then. You need to not be shy. That's how you do it. You know, another wonderful story that I had heard is that it was the matter of your proposal, or his proposal to you, which I understand took place over the intercom of an airplane bound for the United Kingdom.
With some qualifications, yes.
Okay.
We were going over to a conference there, and with some other judges, and he thought, I guess, I shouldn't speak for him, but he asked the flight attendant for earphones, and then I thought, what's going on? He put them on me, and I think he thought that he was just going to be talking to me through the earphones. But anyway, it turned out that the pilot was also connected, and that the other people in our little part of the plane heard that. And so the flight attendants brought out champagne, but we still thought it was just, us who knew about this, and the people right around us. But then as we were coming down into Heathrow, the pilot announced to all 300 and some people on board that there'd been this marvelous event, and a couple had got engaged, gave all the details and so on. Of course, I hadn't talked to my son. I hadn't talked to my family. We didn't know. We didn't want them to read this.
You did
it
say
took
yes
me a while, but ultimately I said yes.
Okay.
And so we were busy once in England telephoning our family, because we knew that this would get in the papers, not the front page, but it would get there. We didn't want them to read it in the papers. So I said later to my husband, you could have consulted me first. But then, of course, it would have lost the element of novelty and surprise, and we wouldn't be talking about the story.
And it's a great story to tell, really. You have been Chief Justice now for over a decade. Mm-hmm. What is it that you enjoy the most about the position, about the role? Well,
I still enjoy the most working on the actual decisions, sitting on the cases, working on the decisions. I also enjoy the administrative role that comes with it, the Canadian Judicial Council, National Institute, which is the education branch for judges, and the business of just making sure things run right on the Supreme Court of Canada, and that all the judges have what they need to work at their best and most effectively and happily. I enjoy all of that, but I must say that what I really enjoy the most is wrestling with the very difficult questions that we are asked to deal with. There's always two sides to a case before the Supreme Court of Canada, sometimes more. There is almost invariably a difference of opinion between learned judges below. These are difficult issues of law, sometimes with considerable social and political ramifications. So we all take that very seriously, and that's our real passion, and it certainly is the case for me.
I truly thank you for taking the time to be here today. It's been a real delight to talk to you.
Well, it's been a delight to talk to you, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you.